you guys hear me okay? All right, perfect. All right, well, I'll start. My name is Ben Dwire, and I'm going to be talking about just some strategies that we found to kind of help raise food grade oats in a no-till system. Just to kind of give you a little background, my wife Kristi and I farm with our two girls, Madison and Sara, in southwestern Minnesota. On our farm, we raise small grains, corn, soybeans, and we have just a handful of sheep around. We kind of try and keep our farm into a 3-year rotation. So I try and stay as close to 1/3 is going to be small grains, 1/3 corn and soybeans, or 1/3 soybeans and 1/3 corn. Typically, we'll have our small grain crop. We'll follow that with corn, and then the corn will be followed with soybeans, and we kind of just try and do that rotation as close as we can. And then we are 100% no-till on our farm. And just kind of give you a little background on the reason that I got interested in raising food grade oats in particular is we're kind of, I suppose, what you would call a small, in the medium-sized to small-sized farm. We farm about 600 acres, all rented. But kind of we're looking for ways that we could hopefully add a little bit niche markets, just kind of some premiums. But I was also looking for things that I could do that maybe I could do some things on a management standpoint that would help us earn a premium without having to actually necessarily spend more money or get into an expensive crop or something like that. So that's kind of what led us to food grade oats. A lot of the strategies that we've kind of found and the things that I've found, it'll work if you're just raising regular oats or even wheat, any of the small grains, these kind of things. It's all pretty interchangeable. We do sometimes switch on our farm between wheat and oats. If we have, like last year in 23, the oat bid was not very good, so I actually switched everything over to wheat, and we actually raised food grade wheat last year instead. And then this past year we were back to oats, and I guess the plan is for this year to raise oats again. So, with that, kind of the starting block for when especially if you're targeting food grade oats, is you're going to start with your varieties. The first place to step off is going to be test weight, because in order to hit the food grade market, they usually have to be 38-pound test weight oats. They will take them down to 36 pounds, but if they're below 36, that is going to be a hard line. If it's below 36 pounds, you probably are not going to get them into the food grade market. That being said, if you're going to do this, it's a really good idea also to make sure you have a local outlet, like maybe an elevator that buys oats, because that's one thing nice about oats is if you have an elevator around, and we have several by us, if they don't make food grade, we have some livestock producers or things, they still make great feed too. So when we're looking, this time of year, I just got it in the mail. The U of M does their variety trials. So that is where I get a lot of my information. I like to look at the U of M variety trials, the South Dakota State variety trials, and then the North Dakota State University variety trials. And so what I like to do is, just like you're picking your bulls, or you're picking, which corn you like, look at the plots. If you see one number that seems to always be sticking his head up, like this guy is always in the top 3, doesn't always have to win everything, but if he's in the top 3, top 5, couple different states, multiple trials over multiple years, that's a really good indicator that that's somebody that I'm looking at. So number one, we're going to look at test weight, and generally speaking, when I look at those results, if it's below 38-pound test weight, and a lot of those I'm probably not that interested unless it's got a crazy good yield. Second on the list is going to be yield. That's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, if you're just trying to raise good oats and you're not worried about the food grade market, then you could probably put that one to the first place. Next thing we're going to look at is usually resistance to rust. And there's a lot of different disease disease resistance and tolerances you can look at, but the one you really want to focus on is crown rust. There's obviously like yellow dwarf barley and stuff like that, but rust is the one that's going to be your biggest challenge in growing oats in general. And being in Minnesota, that's something that we are very, very susceptible to. So if you get a variety that is pretty strong in that package, that's going to help you a lot. You might be able to cut back some of your fungicide applications and some of that kind of stuff. The variety that I have been using the last couple of years is one called Minnesota Pearl. That's from Minnesota. That is a really good all-purpose oat that I've had good success with. Couple years, so oats kind of, a lot of people don't know this, but oats does have full season and short season crops, just like corn do. Pearl and the one before that was Dion, which was kind of somewhat of a relative of that. Those are like 62 or 63 day oats. A couple years ago, I used one called Shelby 427. That was like a 58 day oat. That was a really good oat. It was this is Pearl in this picture. It's a white hull oat, very fat kernels. Shelby was just like that, but it was earlier maturing. We had a really late spring, and we were pushed in the middle of May, so I switched varieties to an earlier maturing oat because we were getting so late. The downside to Shelby was she is extremely susceptible to rust. So we knew going into that one that if we were going to use that, I mean, if it even, rust even sneezes at it, it's going to get it, and you're going to be orange from head to toe. So you knew going into that one, you were probably going to have 2 applications of fungicide if you use that. So those are kind of things you do want to kind of keep in your mind when you're going through them. Another thing that I like to look at, this is a little harder to find, but you can find it in those variety trials. I think South Dakota is the one that publishes it the easiest to find, but the percentage of plumps and thins. If you look at those oats in that picture, I mean, you can tell there's a lot of big fat kernels. I mean, that's some pretty beautiful seed right there. That wasn't out of the combine. That was stuff that was seed oats that we were planting. But you can just see how fat those kernels are. One of the things you can do to get higher test weight is to run the fan on your combine higher and blow more of those thin ones out. It's easier to do that when you have a high percentage of oats that are fat and plumps like that. So that's kind of a management thing. It's a little trickier to find in the stuff, but it is there. You also want to keep track of seeds per pound. So you're going to want to lower seeds per pound. Usually means you have fatter kernels. You got to be a little careful if you only select for test weight. Like for example, there was an oat variety called Antiago out of Wisconsin that was consistently 40-pound oats. And when I talked to the grain millers about it, it wasn't on their list of approved varieties. And the reason for that is because it is teeny tiny seed. And so it didn't work for milling because it was so small. So you could pack tons of seeds into a bushel. And that's why it was heavy, but it wasn't necessarily a good milling oat. And that's the only one that I know that does that. But generally speaking, kind of keep an eye. If you got heavy test weight and fewer seeds per pound, that's a good indicator that that's a good milling oat. Straw strength is another one, kind of a little further down the list. Obviously, if you're trying to raise really good oats, like they say, good oats lodge, crappy ones don't. You have a really good heavy head on there and a good thick stand. That's a lot of leverage on a straw, especially if you get an inch of rain, you wet it down a little bit, then you push on it with a 30-mile-an-hour wind. It takes a good straw to hold that up. So you want to really kind of have something that's in the middle of the range of straw strength or to the high side for straw strength. And then, like I said, maturity. Most oats are pretty similar in maturity. That's just something kind of at the bottom. I have done it where sometimes you go with a earlier maturing oat on one field just so you can get the combine out, get it set on one field before you get into the rest of them. But that's kind of, like I said, that's kind of where you want to start because this is your foundation for the whole year. So if if you don't get this right to start with, it's pretty hard to fix it afterwards. Following that, you kind of got your field selection. On our farm, it's going to be, we're 1/3, so I kind of am stuck. It's going to be, wherever there was beans this year, that's where there's going to be oats next year. If it's not that way for you, planting date is kind of a critical deal with oats. The earlier you can get those planted, the better they're going to yield. So if you had, 300 acres to pick from and you only wanted to seed 30, I would probably try and find that field that you know is going to be ready first. That's like, well, I know this one, I'll probably get into this one a week before everybody else, all the other fields are ready. That would be a good advantage, Or like I have on the bottom, grazing considerations. We like to do a lot of grazing of cover crops afterwards. So you might want to pick one that is next to a pasture or next to a yard where you have a water source, or somewhere where you can plug in an electric fencer. Just some kind of considerations. Previous crop though, that is a really kind of an important one. So I'm not going to say you can't do this, but if you want to no-till into corn stalks, it's not going to be fun. You know, it's going to be a little harder because you've got more residue to go through with the small grains. It is also a grass following a grass, so there's more disease pressure. Fusarium, especially if you're talking wheat. Wheat's even worse than oats are. But there's more disease carryover between corn and oats than there is with soybeans and oats. Also, you're going to have a little more tie-up in the residue with nitrogen. So like I said, it can be done. It's just going to take a little more management, a little more thought and consideration. But if you follow it with soybeans, it can make it a lot simpler. Obviously, you know, we no-till our soybeans into corn stubble. So it's not a matter of getting the drill through it. It's just more of a disease and fertility thing. And if anybody has any questions along the way, feel free to ask them too. Kind of get into some of our fertility management, you know, some of the stuff. Obviously, you know, a lot of us have been through CSP and stuff, so we kind of know they like us to soil test. It's just good kind of standard procedure. One of the beautiful things about oats is they really don't take a lot of fertility compared to a lot of crops. This is kind of our blanket, if you will, kind of what we use for fertilizer. It's kind of a 50, 40, 40, and then 15 blend. That's pretty basic. That 15 pounds of sulfur at the end, that does really benefit. Getting some grasses love sulfur. That really does help. We have gone as low, you know, I have done when we first started raising oats, we used to do a 30-30-30 blend, a triple 30. Some of the best oats that I've actually ever raised have been off of that 30-30-30 blend. So it doesn't always have, this is me trying to ring the bell and get them pushed just a little bit higher. Very first time I ever raised oats was my highest yielding oats that I ever raised, and so it kind of set the hook in deep for me loving to raise oats, but I've kind of been chasing that ever since, you know? Yes?
What's your organic
On
percentage?
our farm? Most of it is going to be right around that 3 to 4.
Are you counting on some of that?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. That's counted in there. Usually, you're thinking you're going to get about 10 pounds or better from that. 10 pounds, or I'm planning about 10 pounds or better in general.
How much percent?
I'd probably say 2.5 pounds per percent or something like that. You know, but so because we no-till, we broadcast it on ahead of planting. So I usually like to treat my nitrogen and my phosphorus. We have an air seeder now, so we put the phosphorus on in furrow with the oats, so that I don't actually treat anymore because we're putting it in the soil. But when I was broadcasting it, we usually did try just to make it a little more available and protect it. And then one thing we've been playing with is we've been playing with side dressing our oats with liquid 28%. So in that situation, we might kind of back down how much we put on early in the season and add it later season. The whole reason, so you kind of got to be careful with oats because if you give them too much nitrogen, they're going to get really, really tall, very vegetative, and they're going to lodge. So that's a real issue with them. Also, they do a lot more of this with wheat because you're putting a lot, wheat you're probably putting 100 pounds or more on as opposed to 50. But if you put too much on early, that small grain plant thinks it's fat and happy. It starts growing and it's like, life is good. I've got more food than I'm ever going to eat, and it's going to throw tillers every direction. And then all of a sudden we get into July and it's like, ooh, I don't have enough. Pretty soon you have aborted heads or you have a lot of small heads. So you're better to manage your tillers. You want tillers, but you don't want like 5 probably, you want 3. So if you can tone down your nitrogen to get them tillers in line, but then come in later and push it after those tillers are set, you can get that, then it's going to move that more towards grain, fill, and stuff like that, as opposed to vegetative and getting tall. And along with that line, when we've been doing this, we started playing with growth regulators to shorten the straw length a little bit too. And what that does is those growth regulators will make the cell walls of the straw thicker, but not as tall. So, I mean, a lot of the oats that we treated with those growth regulators, it'll knock off 6 to 10 inches of height off of it, but they'll stand better. So if you're gonna really try and push the fertility to get more yield, it helps with lodging but these are, the side dressing and the growth regulator, those are kind of add-on things. That's more of the deluxe package. That's not like the standard that we do all the time, but those are kind of just things. Yep. If we're side dressing it, we're probably going to be more like 60 pounds. Like on this 50, 40, 40, if I'm going to side dress it, we'll probably put 40 on at planting and come back and do another 20 later on. So it's not a lot. But 50 to 60 pounds of nitrogen is going to be more than enough in most cases for good oats. Yep. So we just use my sprayer. We've got, they're called stream bars. I got them from Needham Ag. But what they are is so you don't want to, if you're side dressed with that, you don't want to broadcast spray because you're going to cover the leaves and you're going to burn it. It's going to burn it, there's no doubt. But the stream bars drops a heavy stream that it just goes straight through the canopy, and they're probably about 3 inches apart, each stream. So, but it's a heavy solid drop that just goes straight through the canopy. So last year, because it was so wet, we were late on some of the fields, and we almost missed our window for applying nitrogen. And the most important part of the oat plant is the flag leaf, okay? 80% of your yield is usually attributed to that flag leaf and keeping it clean and protected. And the flag leaf was coming out. I thought it was a little further away from coming out than it was. And I did a couple fields, and I burnt the ever living crap out of that flag leaf. And it showed in the yields. So normally you want to be, realistically, when you're side dressing nitrogen, you only want to be, probably that plant should be like 6 inches tall. And we were probably knee high or better when we were doing it. So there is some risk to it with doing that, but you definitely want those stream bars. They're nice. They work really, really well and stuff. But that's what we kind of are using. So kind of the seeding rate, a lot of times, like I said, I kind of shoot for that 1.2 to 1.3 million for a final stand to get a really good thick covering out there. When you're kind of figuring, and this is where when you look at your varieties and you get your seed tag, it's really important to know how many pounds, how many seeds per pound you have so you can adjust it. Because if you have, you got them fat, plump kernels, you're going to have fewer seeds per pound. So you might be looking at more like, it used to be, the old adage was like 2.5 to 3 bushels per acre for oats. But it's more, with these bigger seeds, it's going to be closer to 3.5 and $4 bushels, usually. And, like I said, you kind of plan, you work your math backwards, you plan on 10 to 20%. I would probably push closer to 20% of those seeds not making it because, and some of that's going to depend on where you get your seed from. But generally speaking, if you look at your seed tag, most of that seed has a germination of anywhere from 90 to 85%. Some of it can be higher, but, so right there you're losing 10 to 15% of your total population just in germination. And then you're going to lose 5 to 10% in a mouse coming to clip it off, or geese, or just things happening nature-wise. So, generally speaking, we end up shooting for about 1.5 million seeds as our starting rate. Along with that, super important to calibrate your drill when you're doing this, because there's not really a whole lot of point in going through and really trying to get your seeding rate dialed in if you're not sure how accurate your drill is. This is a super simple process. Pretty much every single drill you can find, there should be a section in your book that tells you how to calibrate it. It takes about a half an hour to do. You're going to need a couple ice cream buckets and a kitchen scale and a calculator. And once you learn how to do it, it is really, really simple. And generally speaking, if you follow your books, it's pretty accurate. I have gone through and calibrated my drill, and I get through the first field, and I'm like, oh, this doesn't look right. I think it's wrong. And then I fiddle with it, and then I end up finding out that it was right the first place, and I had to go buy more seed, because if I would have left it alone, I would have been fine. And every time my wife keeps telling me, just leave it alone. You know, that's how it should be. So, but like I said, it's not a hard process once you do it. It's really, but it is worthwhile, and it helps you get that good uniform stand you're kind of shooting for. These are just some kind of things that we have done with no-tilling small grains. This is my old box drill. I actually sold this to a friend of mine, but a couple things that we've done to really help with stands. Regardless of what kind of a drill you have, if you only have so much money to spend on your budget, get sharp openers. That is, if you only have one thing that you can do, that's where you want to do. You want to have good sharp disc openers that are set nice and tight together. One guy said, he goes, you wouldn't go into surgery with a dull scalpel, and that's kind of what we're doing with no-till. You got to cut a nice sharp seed trench, otherwise you're going to drag crap across the field. You're not going to get your placement the way you want it. If they're not shimmed up right, you're going to get a dirt ribbon in between there, and so your depth won't be quite where you want it. When you're looking for drills, or if you have options, small grains, the narrower you can put those guys together, the better it is. It's just as narrow as you can go. You almost can't go narrow enough. This one here was a 7-inch drill. Most small grain drills are 7 to 7.5 inch spacings. You can find some 8s. Probably could get by with a 10. I don't know if I'd want to. You get much over 10 inches, and I think I would just look for somebody else to seed it for you. But like my dad had an old international press drill, and it's not a no-till drill, but that thing was 6 inches spacings, and we still have it. It wasn't fancy, but that old girl could make some wheat grow. She really could seed a nice stand. I've even heard of guys retrofitting, like in Canada and places with their no-till drills, where they'll add a third rank so that they can get down to 5 to 6 inches. I wouldn't go that extreme. You don't need to, but I'm just saying, if you can find a 7.5 inch, 7.5 is pretty standard. That's kind of where you want to be for seed space, or for row spacings. This drill, I added Keaton seed firmers, and that's what we got, right down here. With that drill, that was kind of my baby for a long time. I've tried to tweak it and make that thing work as best I could. That was one of the better investments I've ever made on our farm, was those seed firmers. It really kind of pushes it down into the seed trench, and you get that good seed to soil contact. Putting them on there was the first time I ever had a drill that emergence would look like a corn planter, where they would all kind of come up within a really short period of time. If you look right up here, it's called a mojo wire. It's a little black, almost like a flat spring that we added onto that too, and that just added a little more down pressure. But those are just white poly, and so they get kind of weak and bent over time, and so that just kind of helps make them a little more rigid and push that seed down. Before I had those, I tried something called a seed rebounder. They were these orange little things, and that's literally what they do. They rebound the seed. They don't actually push it down in the seed trench, they just kind of keep it from spilling out. It helps a little bit, but these were kind of nice. One thing I will say about these, whenever you have somebody running your drill and you have seed firmers in there, you make sure they know they have to lift it all the way out of the ground before they back up, or they're going to bend and you're going to sit there. And they're easy to bend back, but they have to be up out of the ground. You don't want to back up with it just lightly out of the ground, or they're all going to bend up on you. But those were really handy. And then I put a rolling basket. The last 2 years I had that drill. I put a rolling basket on the back. And then we didn't even hardly have any down pressure on that. It just rolled free on the ground. And what we were looking for is sometimes with drills, if you get a little bit of moisture, those closing wheels will tend to flick seed out and they'll lay on the surface. We were just trying to kind of push as many of those kind of flyaways as we could back into the ground, kind of finish up, smooth things out. I really did like that. That worked really nice. Before that, I tried drag chains behind there. That wasn't very much fun. It worked really good in soybean stubble, but when we got into corn stalks, they would catch on a stalk and then they'd flip around and wrap around a wheel. And it took me about 15 minutes into the front field, and I was out there with an impact pulling all of them off. But that one I liked pretty well. So what we use now, the other, this is what I seed with now. That's my air seeder that I have. Similar type of deal, obviously. This is a single disc opener. Having a good sharp disc opener really helps. This is an SDX30, an old Case IH. This is pretty much the exact same configuration as a John Deere. It's like a 750, 1590, one of those. It just comes in, the only real difference between them is this has a 22.5-inch disc blade, and I think the John Deeres are more like 18, so it's a bigger one. I do like on this, again, on the gauge wheels, I like the Case IH gauge wheels because they got that reduced inner diameter gauge wheels, so that when it's cutting that slot open and it's kind of pushing the dirt up, it doesn't pack. It's got a space for that to go, so it doesn't push down as much. But a couple of the things that we added onto this that really have helped. If you look down here, that is a seed firming wheel, which is kind of very similar to that Keaton seed firmer that I had on the box drill. But that is a green polyurethane wheel, so it's soft and pliable, and it's tapered so that it rides in the seed trench and it pushes the seed down, but if you're going around a curve, it rides with you. It bends and it's flexible. The OEM ones are black, hard plastic, and so when you're going around curves, they'll either blow the sidewalls out or they'll just hop out and ride along top. And then we also added the notched closing wheels behind. That one just had a rubber closing wheels, but if you get into some tougher conditions or if you're no-tilling into cover crops, it doesn't close up as well. Those have worked really good. They're really heavy. I want to say they're 7-8 pounds a piece. So we pretty much don't have any down pressure on that closing wheel. She just rides on the ground because it's heavy enough. That's 3/4-inch armored steel is what that's made out of. So it's heavy, heavy duty stuff. They do make poly closing wheels and different things, but I was told those tend to wear really, really fast. And then the last thing that we did to this air seeder, which really I like it a lot. If you look above the opener up there, it's called a seed brake. It's kind of that silver thing. So air seeders, they blow the seed and fertilizer to the seed slot using airflow. The downside is there is nowhere for that air to go. It comes out the bottom of the seed trench with the seed. So if you have too much air pressure, you blow that you're asking to blow. You can blow your seed out of the seed trench before you get it closed up. If you don't have enough air pressure, you're going to plug up your seed line. So it's kind of the song and dance that you do. What this does is that's like a screen, and it lets the air diffuse out above the seed tube. So when that's all coming through with the air just kind of disappears, and then from that point down, it's just gravity flow dropping it in there. Then you can kind of set your airflow and go and not worry if you have too much or too little. And that gets rid of a lot of the seed bouncing out of the seed trench. But those are kind of some things that we've done with the two different drills to really kind of help get a better stand with this. So some of the chemical fungicide programs that we do. Fall weed control on small, yes.
How deep do you plant?
About 1.5 inches. Yep. Yes.
I see a pretty big tractor on that air seeder.
Yes.
Does that take a lot of horsepower?
Yes, it does. That's a 350 horse tractor on a 30. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of hydraulic power. But that air seeder is 28,000 pounds empty. So she is a heavy, heavy girl. And then that's without anything in the cart. And we've got some pretty big hills. You don't have to have one that big. I mean, like 240 horse would probably be enough. But when I was looking at getting a tractor for that, everybody said, and I can testify to this, if you've ever gone down a gravel road with an air seeder that's loaded and try and take a corner, you're going to realize why they like four-wheel drives out west instead of front-wheel assist. Because first time I brought that home and I bought that and I was empty, I took that corner a little bit fast and we came uncomfortably close to a stop sign with that thing. So they are heavy and they'll push you around. So like I said, fall wheat, with the oats, with no-till, one of my biggest weeds that I used to fight was dandelions. I absolutely hate dandelions. And so I found that was usually one of my biggest things I would fight was, again, if we took care of them in the fall, that would save us a lot of headaches in the spring. And when I say like fall weed control, I just have a notebook with me out in the tractor. And if I'm combining this bean field, I'm like, okay, these headlands got some issues and maybe this hillside does. So out of 200 acres, we might spot spray 15 to 10. You just, if you've got some thistles or dandelions that are still actively growing in the fall, if you can hit them before it gets really cold, come fall time, that plant is pulling all of its nutrients down into its root to store for overwinter. It's going to suck that chemical down in there with it, and it'll get a really strong kill. Come spring, it's doing the opposite. It's trying to push everything out and up, and those dandelions can really be tough to kill in the spring. But if you do it in the fall, usually we're looking at 2,4-D and dicamba. Doesn't take a lot, and it's a pretty cheap way to get rid of dandelions. We've done a lot where we've underseeded red clover as a cover crop with our oats. And so with that, obviously there are some weed control issues with that too. So we still use this a lot even when we don't, but we use a product called Sword. But basically the chemical is MCPA. The guys at the co-op called it the old oat chemical. It's been around forever and ever. I would say of all the chemicals used, it's going to be on the lower potency side, and it's not very expensive. Works decent on thistles, and it actually doesn't work too bad on water hemp and stuff if you get it early. It stinks on dandelions. What it's going to do, it'll twist them up, and they're going to turn brown and look really angry, and then a week later, they're back to being green again. But the only stuff that you can really use that'll kill dandelions is going to take you out of a lot of the cover crop game too. So that's kind of one that we've used a lot. And then, like I said, we usually like to hit that with some fungicide, especially because we have so much rust issues. Just in Minnesota, that's something that we know we're going to fight with a lot. And rust is going to really suck the yield out of those oats. With that, your timing is extremely critical. If you're going to put fungicide on your oats, you need to do it at the flag leaf. It's one of those deals where I know it stinks because it's an extra trip, but you can put fungicide on when you do your post herbicide, and sometimes we do that, a low rate, but if you don't cover your flag leaf, you kind of are wasting your fungicide dollars because that leaf has got to be protected. And it doesn't seem like it matters what year it is. It's gonna be Father's Day. I guarantee I'm gonna spend Father's Day spraying fungicide oats. That's just how it always works every year. And every year the girls are like, Dad, what do you want for Father's Day? And they're like, let me guess, you want to spray? And I'm like, yep, but that's just how it always works out. But it's got to be its own trip, and it is important. So it's kind of one of them. You got to have the sprayer cleaned out and ready because when you can go, you can go. You also, with these fungicides, we don't want to get to the floor, right? We don't want to penetrate the canopy any more than we have to. We don't want to get it on the soil. I just want to cover that top leaf. So you're just looking for something that's going to just cover those top leaves, but you're not trying to penetrate the canopy, so you don't need big droplets and things like that. With harvesting, a couple different things we do that can help. There's two different ways we harvest them. We can either swath them in a windrow. So with oats, when you harvest oats, they're going to go through a sweat. They're going to kind of heat up and release some moisture. It's either going to happen in the field or it's going to happen in your grain bin, but it is going to happen. There's nothing you can do about that. If you do not have good ventilation system for storage, swathing is a really good way, and that's why that's been done for years and years and years, swathing. Because a lot of guys had old corn, wooden cribs and things like that, or bins without air. It works well, and it's a tried and true way to do it. Swathing, it will also allow if you have an uneven crop where you have a lot of green heads, this will help you even that out a little bit more. Or you can swath it when your heads are all tan, but your stem might have a little bit of greenness to it yet. if you swath it when that straw is going to be just a little bit more durable and will hold together through the combining process a little bit better too. The downside is if it rains, it kind of stinks. That's the downside to that is, I had one year where we had almost 8 inches of rainfall on oats that were down in a windrow, and they started sprouting, and those didn't turn out super great. That all got fed up. So so the other option is to straight cut it. Then you're going to probably have to wait an extra week or two to harvest. Like I said, it works really good it's a good option. I shouldn't say it works really good. It's a good option if it's a wet pattern or if it's really dry. These oats here, these were underseeded with red clover, but you can see they were plenty mature. This was right on the verge if I should be swathing it or if I should be straight cutting it. Because when they get really ripe, that swath there, those bat wheels are going to knock seeds off. If you're going to knock the seeds off, you might as well knock them into the head of the combine. At least you can save some of them that way. So also, if you're not going to combine or if you're not going to bale the straw, then you can just cut below the seed heads with straight cutting and not run as much material through. Like I said before, probably the big thing is when you're doing the food grade oats is you want to turn the fan up as high as you can, blow as much air through that to get those light ones out. And it's possible you might be blowing realistically to make grade, you might be blowing 5 bushels out the back of your combine. So do not ever buy oats for a cover crop seed because you probably got them out there if you're doing that. But they'll grow. They'll grow, and you turn the cattle loose out there, and you'll collect it back that way. So it's just fine. One of the other things you could do to, like I said, if you get them in the bin, if you can run air on them, that helps. Oats like to go for a ride. The more times you can run oats through an auger, the heavier they're going to get, because you'll break that little bit of a tip off of the end of the hulls. So, like when we combine oats, I don't have a grain vac. That's another thing you can do. Grain vacs is another way you can probably add. When you run them through a grain vac, you'll probably add a half a pound to a pound of test weight just by the grain vac. Or we use augers. I'll dump it into the grain cart whether I need to or not, and we dump it into the truck. I'll put it in the dryer bin, and then once we get enough to turn on the fans, I like to run that fan while we're unloading and push as much crap out of the top. If I'm unloading oats and it looks like a little smokestack coming out of the top of the dryer bin, I'm pretty pleased with that because that means I'm blowing stuff up. Then I'll usually run a stirrator and kind of mix them up and kind of, not beat them up, but you can just rough them up as much as you can, and then we'll usually run them through another auger to another bin when we're done. Yep.
Do you have a special floor?
It's just a regular air floor. Yep, nothing special about it at all. Nope. They're tiny little holes, and I'm sure there's stuff that little pieces that go through, but no, And once they've gone through their sweat, oats are really easy to store. It's not like corn where you got to watch for hot spots. Oats really store beautiful. And like I said, I run, and it seems excessive, but I have the augers, so we just do it that way just to try and add our test weight. So when you're combining it and you're kind of playing with your airflow to find, a good place for test weight wise, I'm in the field, I'm probably going to shoot this 36 pounds is what I'm going to shoot for. If you're combining your oats and you're hitting 36 pounds in the field, by the time you pull them out of the bin, you're probably 38 and a half to 39 pounds. But it's kind of a fine line because you want to run that air and do all this stuff, but you got to find a line where you're not blowing all of your money out the back of the combine too. So you got to find out, I figured, for us, if we can get it to 36 pounds, then we're going to make it to 38 pretty easy. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it was always a goal of mine to hit 48 to 50 pound oats because there's a guy in Canada that did it, and it's just something I've got to do someday. But there's also a limit where you can, to do that, I got a feeling you got to blow a lot of crap out the back. So maybe on a small field we'll try it, but highest I've ever hit was 43 pounds. So just kind of, just like I said, just kind of the 5 main things to kind of help hit food grade specs. Oat variety, fungicide on the flag leaf, fan speed's a big one, run it through augers, and then as a last ditch effort, grain back. So, and just a couple of side notes. Sometimes oats and small grains, it's kind of hard to economically justify them compared to corn and soybeans. For us, I feel like oats is one of those crops that makes the other two look better. By having that 3-year rotation, you've got more rotation. We don't have to do the triple stacks because we break up that rootworm cycle a little bit more. It also allows, we sell all of our straw. You know, some people don't like it, some people do, but to be honest with you, that's $100 an acre or more. Usually, I mean, it's not real hard anymore to get $100 to $120 a ton for straw. It's worth some good money, and we're only going to take it off 1 out of 3 years. It also allows us from a soil health standpoint, we're going to put a full season cover crop behind small grains. It allows us to do a little more fun mixes that we can't do behind corn because we just have more time to work with. It also allows us to get cattle, so we'll try and get cattle onto all of these acres of small grains that we can. Last 2 years have not worked out because it's been so dry. The cover crops maybe got an inch tall. That does happen. Without water, there's not much you can do. You still try, but so we do some custom grazing for neighbors, so that kind of helps too. I've also worked out deals with neighbors where they've paid for the cover crop seed, I plant it, and they get to graze it. That works really well. It saves some costs for me. We get the livestock impact out there. They get some cheaper feed in the fall. So there's different ways to make that one work too. So with that, I guess, does anybody have any other questions? That is actually that same field that I just had on. That is, yeah, that's that same field about 2 months later. Yes?
Between the root structure of the oats and the root structure of the clover, are you putting a lot of good things under this one?
Well, one thing that's nice about small grains in general, small grains are a good topsoil loosener, so it really kind of loosens things up and makes a really mellow soil. Oats are an incredible source of mycorrhizal fungi also, which is another added benefit over most other small grains. So yeah, you can do a lot of really, but you know, like in a mix like that, we're usually going to put some radishes and turnips and things like that out there too for grazing. Very rarely are we going to put just 1 or 2 things. Even like when we've done red clover, I'll usually come back and we'll put some like turnips, radishes and stuff like that, and then you'll have volunteer oats that come up and stuff. And we'll usually put cereal rye out there too.
But not at the same time.
No, well, the red clover goes in the spring, and the rest of them will go in the fall. And part of the reason we started doing the red clover in the spring is because we've had dry years in the past. I generally know I can get some kind of a cover crop to start in the spring because we have moisture. So at least I know if it A, either gets really wet or B, gets really dry, I hopefully have something started that'll grow. And then if things look good, we hopefully can come back and add more to it later. But that's where we first started with the red clover was I'm like, okay, on a dry year, I at least need to get something started. So that's where and then, you know, the red clover, or we use vetch, and it's hopefully producing some nitrogen for the corn crop. That's why we like to follow this with a corn crop too. So we're hopefully growing some nitrogen that way. Yep.
You're just no tilling to cover in the fall into the red clover, is that?
Yes. Yep.
So have you done any side-by-sides where you have oats in the rotation and not, say, just corn and soybeans? Is there, as far as the performance of the soybeans and corn?
No, I can't. Well, I've got a few fields that we've gotten out of rotation where they have missed a small grain year because one year we had it was actually by that building site on that east side of that farm. That one I took out of the rotation because I used to do everything was all conventional. So we had conventional food grade soybeans and conventional corn, and we had a grass run away in the corn that was unbelievable. And then it ran away in the beans a little bit too. And so we switched over to enlist beans. So I took a year off of small grains so we could use Roundup and clean that up and get rid of those weed issues. But, you know, I don't know. That field has never quite been the same. I don't know if it just doesn't like me or if it's the grass. I'm not sure what all happened over there, but that field has kind of been a struggle since, but that's just a field. I'm not saying it's the reason for it, but yes.
How early do you plant? You have to worry about the freeze thawing?
No, not really. As soon as you can get in there, as soon as it's fit to plant, the earlier the better. Usually you're hopefully shooting for April. I have always wanted to, this would have been the year we couldn't quite do it, but I'm like, I would love to have planted oats in March once. And I have planted for a neighbor in March. We did some wheat one year in March, but usually it's April. And honestly, middle of April works really good. So that's one thing nice about small grains. For the most part, this stuff was bred for that. These things can take it. If it was like today and we had extended periods where if it's below the ground or the growth point is still down below the ground, you're probably okay. If you were coming out of the ground and you had an extended period where you were like 10 degrees, yeah, that could happen. But for the most part, you're kind of the way it is anymore, you're right ahead of the guys with corn. Usually the same time I'm putting oats in, everybody's doing their corn. So you're not really too far off of the other stuff. But for the most part, this will handle cold weather better than corn and soybeans will, because it's made for that. Yep.
Where are you marketing your?
So all of my oats have been going to grain millers, and St. Ansgar, Iowa is where that goes to. That they have, as of right now, I've got a bin full of oats right now that is not contracted or priced, just because you know how it was this year. We were all hoping the price would go up, and then it kind of didn't. So I'm sitting on some bunch of unpriced oats, but that's where I have gone, and I can honestly say I've been selling there for probably 10 years. That's been a company I've been extremely happy to work with. They've been really good. I've been really pleased.
Do they normally pay on average?
It's, realistically, it's usually 50 to 70 cents a bushel more than most elevators are, or more. Sometimes it's up to $1 more. It just depends. It's worth the trucking to get there. Plus, there's usually a premium. Yeah.
With the clover you're seeded into the oats, do you ever have an issue with clover getting too tall?
Yeah, so if you look, let me go back here. Like this was pretty good, but like that year when we had all them rains, yeah, when it started raining, I had clover starting to come through the windrow, and then that got a little bit funky. And so, yeah, that wasn't real special. But for the most part, other than when it gets really wet, and then next year, since then we've actually been straight cutting, and then it works pretty dang good. That being said, when it happened, you have a lot of red clover in your straw bales, and cows tend to eat that too while you're bedding with it. Yeah. Yep.
You didn't tell me how to kill the red clover. I had trouble. It got too tall
Yep.
before I called you the second time.
Yep. So 2,4-D and dicamba, a pint of each, is a really good way to get rid of red clover. That's probably the most economical, best way we found to do it. Stinger, anything with stinger in it works really well too. The downside with stinger is it can hang around for a few years. So we've been using, very first time we ever did the red clover, we used Sharpen to kill it, to try to kill it. We did a full 2 ounce, Sharpen's usually about 1 ounce per acre, works awesome as a burn down. We did 2 ounces on that red clover into conventional corn nonetheless. And we turned that stuff brown as brown could be, and about a week later I saw green shoots coming back out of the crown all over again. And that was an oh crap moment, because that red clover we no-tilled into was probably knee to waist high. So it was a thick mat, and good luck trying to see where my rows were at and stuff like that. And it got kind of funky. So I know that it can be a tough one to kill. So we found out the hard way, if the chemical does not specifically say kills red clover, it doesn't kill red clover. It can say kills alfalfa, it can say kills Dutch white or white clover, but if it does not specifically say red clover, it won't. It's just going to make it mad. But there is, like I said, 2,4-D and dicamba really works well. And then we'll usually come through with one more pass of dicamba with the corn. Like I said, we've done a lot of that, where we no-till. And a lot of times when we're no-tilling our corn or that stuff, it is knee high. And so that being said, you're going to have a few plants you're going to have to come back and clean up, because when it's like an alfalfa field, you're going to kill most of those guys, but that canopy is so thick, little brother is hiding down behind big brother. You just physically cannot reach that with enough herbicide. So you're going to have maybe 10% that you're going to have to come back and clean up. But last few years we have actually been using more vetch in the fall instead of the red clover, but just trying some things different.
Have you ever used a stripper head?
No, I haven't. I know they work really well. Guys like them. So I don't have one, so I haven't used one. But, yep.
Just for a place to market the oats, there's a new female or a male going up outwardly, and they're looking for growers.
Okay.
They're going to talk to them.
Okay. And I will say too, I absolutely love oats. We don't want to talk about monoculture, but in a perfect world, if all I could ever do was raise oats and never touch corn or soybeans again in my life, I would be thrilled, because I just love oats. I just love to raise them. But like I said, they are such a cool food. Like you look at oatmeal, and they are just a powerhouse food. And you feed them to livestock too. Some of our old neighbors, they'd like, when you wean your calves, you put them on oats for a couple weeks, just a couple pounds of oats in that diet. It's amazing. Those hair coats get so shiny, and it's just, it's a really cool food. It really does wonders for livestock too. We feed it to our ewes some, and it's a neat plant. I really do love it. Any other questions?
You have to be concerned about what you sprayed on your soybeans.
It's not, soybeans isn't usually too bad, because most of the time, with your soybeans, the stuff you're really targeting, it's going to be water hemp and your broadleaf. So there's usually not too bad. So it's really not, we haven't really run into much of an issue. And now that we've started growing using enlist beans, it's really, I will say, enlist beans, in my opinion, are like the best thing since sliced bread. That stuff, going from conventional back to enlist beans, it is nice to have clean fields again. So, yes.
And when you're putting your pea on with the
Yep.
oats, that goes right in the seed trench with the oats.
What's that?
Fertilizer goes right with the oats. in the seed trench.
Yep. So, yeah, because my air seeder, we got 2 bins, and it all goes into one run. But you can pretty much, so I like to use a product called Mez. Otherwise, because you don't want to put your potassium or your nitrogen on with it, because you'll burn it. But Mez is the most crop safe, and then you're going to get a couple pounds of nitrogen in there, but it's coated with a polymer, I think. But you also get a little bit of micros and some sulfur in there too. So and I will say, if you have never used Mez before, that stuff augers awesome. Like urea and DAP and some of that can get kind of clumpy. Mez is coated, and it's almost like a seed, and so it doesn't gunk up your seed tubes and stuff like that. I do know that I've heard guys say too that if you just have a box drill, and you only have one box, you can mix your Mez and your seed together in that. It'd be the exact same thing. If you had a way to mix the two together, and you have a box drill or something like that, it's not going to be any different than when it's going in the seed trench. They're going in together. It's just you got to find a way to do it. But I will say from a yield standpoint, putting that phosphorus in there does make a pretty decent difference. I think it would be worth the way to find to do it. This is an outside the box stupid idea, but I have often wondered about mixing distillers grains in there just a little bit, because distillers is pretty high in some of that stuff. I've wondered, because sometimes you can find some of those burnt distillers that don't meet feed specs, but they still have a lot of nutrient value, but it's not salt. I have wondered if a guy could ever mix some of that in there, just curious what that would do, you know, because it's another feedstock, so it should be pretty plant safe. But that's just a dumb tractor thought that you have when you're out there thinking. But any other questions?
On your fertilizer rate that you had 50, 40, 40, 15,
Yep.
you figure in the bean credits with nitrogen?
Yeah, because realistically, we're probably thinking more like 60 pounds. So I'm thinking we're going to pick up 10 pounds of nitrogen from the bean credits. So if I was planting behind corn stalks, I'd probably add an extra 10 pounds. Yep. I'm one of them guys where I kind of have faith that those 10 pounds are going to show up, but I would rather let those be my bonus pounds and like let's cover our bases. And if those 10 pounds show up, hopefully they'll push us to 130, 150 bushel oats instead of 110. You know, that's just me because they're going to be there, but I still get a little weary about some of it. Yes.
Do you graze your sheep at all on any of these?
We haven't. Well, no, that's not true. My brother and I have, and then we use like some of that electric netting and stuff. So yeah, we have done some, but for the most part, sheep is more of a hobby, kind of a sideline thing. I grew up more with cattle, and honestly, cattle are really easy to graze because you can do one polywire around. I've got enough. And I like to rotational graze I do manage my cover crop like a pasture. I like to kind of rotate it, so I don't like to give them much more than a week at a time, and then we'll strip it and move them across. So cattle are really easy to do that. One polywire. We also have a ton of coyotes by us, so we get a little bit nervous about having some of them used that far from home. And the sheep that we have are show lambs, so they're inherently stupid. And so if they're gonna get eaten or die, it's gonna be them. It's not gonna be just a plain ewe. So that's why they kind of stay home and get to hide where I can see them. But yeah, like I said, cattle are really easy. I mean, we've been doing this, and we'll graze corn stalks and stuff too. But we live right on State Highway 19. I have absolutely no problem with having 70 cows with one polywire holding them off the highway and I'm not going to worry about that at night. I like, there's a company called PowerFlex. They make this braided polywire. It looks like bootlace. That stuff is good stuff. It's not cheap. I have seen 1,500 pound cows get their legs caught in that and pull it tight and not break it, or you got to cut it off. But I mean, it'll hold. But it's bright white with black lines, so the deer can see it, the cattle can see it. It's really good visibility stuff. It's got 3 different types of metals, so you get really good conductiveness. But especially if you're going to be out doing this stuff, braided polywire is what you want to get, not the twisted. Because braided polywire, those metal fibers are overlapped. So if it frays or breaks in one spot, it's overlapped so many times that current carries through. The twisted wire that comes from a company that's orange and black, that stuff is really expensive and it sucks, in my opinion. But that stuff, if you break it somewhere, you'll lose conductivity really fast with that. So, I mean, I've got an opinion on that, obviously, but like I said, yeah, we like to run cattle out there, and and we live where we live, we run them on stocks and everything too, and we've not had problems with it, and then we usually wait till the crops are out to bring them home, and we'll just run them right across the section, run them back home. So we'll walk them down the gravel road or whatever. But it is a lot of fun seeing cattle turn loose on cover crops. I know one guy that I custom fed for is actually that picture we had up here earlier. He had a creep feeder that they had full in that pasture. that neighbor of mine, and he goes, once we turn them onto them cover crops, he goes, I brought the creep feeder home because the cattle quit eating it. They were so content on that cover crop, the calves they didn't lose any weight. They just didn't have a need to go back and eat that creep feed. So he brought it to a different pasture, but you can get some pretty good gains off of those young calves on those cover crops.